If it's Tuesday, President Biden implements an executive action that will dramatically crack down on asylum seekers at the southern border as the White House tries to address a major political liability facing Democrats in November. Plus, Attorney General Merrick Garland spars with House Republicans, rejecting conspiracy theories about Donald Trump's conviction in New York while rebuking lawmakers for spreading, quote, baseless and extremely dangerous falsehoods about the FBI's search for classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. And an FBI agent takes the stand as the prosecution's first witness in Hunter Biden's criminal gun trial, as embarrassing details surrounding Hunter's lifestyle and drug use are revealed in court. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Yamisha Sendor in Washington, where President Biden has just delivered remarks after signing an executive action that will turn away thousands of migrants at the border every day. The action, which went into effect immediately after it was issued, triggers a shutdown of asylum requests for nearly all migrants who try to enter the United States between official ports of entry. Speaking from the White House, the president defended the move as necessary to regain control over the border.
This action will help us gain control of our border, restore order into the process. This ban will remain in place until the number of people trying to enter illegally is reduced to a level that our system can effectively manage. We must face the simple truth. To protect America as a land that welcomes immigrants, we must first secure the border and secure it now.
The executive action goes into effect when daily illegal migrant crossings exceed 2,500. Already, though, daily encounters are well above that threshold, though there are some notable exceptions to the crackdown on asylum claims, including for unaccompanied minors. The U.S.-Mexico border is currently averaging more than 4,000 illegal crossings a day. That is actually a sharp decline from the surge we saw in December and January. But still, that's more than enough to trigger the new executive action. The ACLU says it plans to sue over the restrictions. According to Customs and Border Patrol statistics, the last time illegal migrant crossings were below that 2,500 per day threshold was back in January of 2021, when President Biden took office. Politically, today's action marks a rightward shift for the president over the issue of immigration. It also comes as our latest NBC News poll shows immigration is among the issues most important to voters in 2024. Meanwhile, today, Republicans are slamming the president's actions as too little, too late. Here's House Speaker Mike Johnson.
They did it intentionally. They engineered the open border. There's no question about it. The evidence is so clear. And now, suddenly, now he wants to issue some weak executive order. By the way, one executive order, supposedly to try to address the issue. It's window dressing. Everybody knows it. If he was concerned about the border, he would have done this a long time ago.
But today, President Biden blamed Republicans for the lack of action on the border. He said they forced him to act alone by bowing to pressure from former President Donald Trump.
We came to a clear bipartisan deal. It was the strongest border security agreement in decades. But then Republicans in Congress, not all, but walked away from it. Why? Because Donald Trump told them to. He told the Republicans, it has been published widely by many of you, that he didn't want to fix the issue. He wanted to use it to attack me.
Despite that, the political advantage that Republicans have on the issue has remained massive. Former President Trump has a 30-point advantage over Joe Biden on the issue. And Republicans have only seen their lead on immigration grow since President Biden took office. NBC News' Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley has more on how this executive action will change things at the southern border from McAllen, Texas.
Down here in McAllen, a border town in Texas, a lot of things are continuing as usual. You can see that just behind me at this bus station, migrants are still boarding these buses and going to other places in the country. What will change, effective today, is that when more migrants come across illegally, effectively crossing the Rio Grande River and going to turn themselves into Border Patrol, they will not be eligible for asylum unless they can prove that they somehow meet a higher standard. If they can prove that they would face a high likelihood of torture upon return, if they have an acute medical need here, if they're an unaccompanied child, for example, these are all ways that they could be exceptions to the rule, but otherwise they cannot get asylum if they cross the border illegally. This is actually a page from President Trump's playbook and one that was enjoined by the courts under that administration. And so we can expect to see very swift action from immigration advocacy organizations like ACLU and others who will challenge this in court. Another practical problem with this, I'm told by Border Patrol agents, is that ICE and Border Patrol lack the manpower to put this into place. They will have to deport anyone who is not eligible, and there will be so many people who will not be eligible for asylum now, and they lack the space to hold them in CBP facilities and ICE facilities, and they lack the number of airplanes to deport them. Furthermore, a huge, fast-growing nationality coming across the border are Venezuelans, and Venezuela in large part refuses to take back any of its nationals who are being deported from the United States, which would create a huge problem for the way this is supposed to go. But for those who still want to cross legally, they can continue to do so. They can make an appointment through the CBP One app. They can go through a legal port of entry, and life will continue for them. This is all part of the Biden administration's strategy to try to make it harder to cross illegally and open up more pathways to cross legally. Of course, we are hearing from some Republicans today who are saying it's too little, too late.
And thank you to Julie Ansley for that report from the border. Joining me now from the White House is Aaron Gilchrist. So, Aaron, talk to us about the timing of this announcement. Why is President Biden signing this executive action on the border right now?
Well, I think there are a couple of factors at play here when you look at that question, Yamiche. We did hear from, obviously, in your reporting and in Julia's reporting that right now the Homeland Security Department is saying that they're seeing about 4,000 of these encounters with migrants trying to cross the border illegally at the southern border right now. And that number is a number that President Biden has indicated is one that is just not manageable by CBP officials at the southern border. And so that is part of the reason that we're seeing this action taken at this moment. At the same time, we heard from a senior administration official today that historically, in the summer months, they do see a bigger surge in the number of migrants trying to cross into the United States. And so with this being the beginning of June, beginning of summer, this move would effectively try to head that off before it can become a much bigger situation. But I think Julia really noted some of the nuance in the complications that this executive order will present for the administration and for the Department of Homeland Security.
And some of the big complications here are that the legal challenges. The ACLU is already saying that it's going to challenge this executive action. Is the White House prepared for that legal challenge?
Yeah, almost immediately, the ACLU came out and said, we will sue. They say that this executive order is illegal. The Department of Justice has said that it sort of anticipated that there might be legal challenges to this executive order, and it simply said that it is prepared to go to court and to defend the president's executive orders on this. It's something that the Department of Justice has indicated it does regularly with orders of this nature. But as Julia noted in her reporting as well, this is something that the Trump administration had to deal with when it tried to enact similar rules back in 2018. And so, and obviously the court in that instance did not side with the administration. So it will be interested to see what exactly is the argument that we see from groups like the ACLU and how the Biden administration intends to fight that, Yamiche.
Yeah, definitely something that we're going to watch there. I also want to talk about the politics of this. In interviews with voters across several battleground states, I've heard over and over again that they are concerned about border security, and even Republicans and Democrats together. They trust former President Trump more than Biden when it comes to border issues. So how much of this is about politics when you look at the president's actions today?
Yeah, it's a valid question. The administration would say that it's been working on this issue for several months. Obviously, it backed the bipartisan immigration legislation that was eventually voted down in the Senate, and it would like to see Congress take action more than it wants the president to have to take these sorts of actions. At the same time, this is something that's become a bit of a campaign issue because, as we've noted, former President Trump has sort of put his thumb on the scale when it came to that vote in the Senate and other movements in the House on this issue. And so the administration administration, the campaign, is looking at this as President Biden taking action where others wouldn't. In the minutes after President Biden spoke, the campaign did put out a statement, part of which said the American people demand solutions for our broken immigration system. But at every step of the way, Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans have made clear they only want chaos and partisan politics as usual. And so this is something that the campaign is not shying away from. We can expect, I think, Yamiche, to hear President Biden speaking more about this. As we've heard, there could potentially be other executive actions taken on this issue, on border security and on immigration. And we can expect to hear him say it on the campaign trail, talk about this on the campaign trail as an issue that the campaign is trying to sit squarely in the lap of Republicans and the president's competitor for the White House, Donald Trump.
Yeah, and we're, of course, going to continue to hear from voters about their concerns about this. So thank you so much, Aaron, for your reporting from the White House. We're now going to get reaction a little bit later on on President Biden's new executive action from the Republican mayor of a border city in a moment. But first, we've got another development today when it comes to immigration enforcement and the 2024 election. Arizona's state legislature is voting right now on a measure that would put a controversial immigration initiative on the ballot in November. NBC News campaign embed Alex Tabbitt has more from Arizona.
The Arizona state legislature is set to advance a controversial immigration bill. Sponsored by Republicans and known as the Secure the Border Act, HCR 2060 puts immigration policy on the ballot in November.
We are putting border security policy to the voters.
And bypasses the need for Democratic Governor Katie Hobbs' signature, who's come out against it. It would require welfare programs to use the federal E-Verify system to check recipients' immigration status, mandate employers to use E-Verify for contractors, and the biggest point of contention, allow state and local law enforcement officials to arrest people who cross the border illegally, a job courts have ruled falls to the federal government.
The Biden administration's failure to take care that the laws of Congress be faithfully executed has a lot to do with it.
Critics of HCR 2060 likening its ramifications to Arizona's controversial 2010 immigration policy, SB 1070. A policy that sparked nationwide protests.
State of Arizona finding itself at the center of a growing storm over its tough new immigration law.
And allowed police to question the immigration status of Arizonans.
Critics accuse Arizona authorities of racial profiling.
Known then as the Show Me Your Papers law, SB 1070 led to thousands of Latinos in the state living in fear.
We had to fear getting out of our house. We had to fear going to the grocery store, fearing going to school.
Republican state legislators like Alex Colladin say HCR 2060 is different to SB 1070.
SB 1070 had a Show Me Your Papers provision. Then I went and read this HCR. It's not in there.
But Democrats like State Senator Flavio Bravo, who represents one of the most diverse districts in the state, think vaguely worded language in the bill could leave his constituents living in fear.
They shouldn't have to live in fear that they would be detained or apprehended or asked about their immigration status when they're just trying to work and provide for their families.
With the state house set to vote, the fate of Arizona's immigration policy potentially up to voters in November.
And joining me now is Alex Tabbitt, of course, our NBC News embed. Alex, great reporting there. Now, voting is really happening right now. This is all in likelihood going to the voters. How are Arizonans viewing this issue? And is it something that's expected to be popular given sort of the politics of immigration as we've laid out?
Well, Yamiche, as you might expect, Republicans are for HCR 2060, the voters who I've talked to at least. They say that the immigration crisis, as they call it, what's happening on the southern border is a serious issue that needs to be addressed, and this is the best way forward. Remember, Arizona is a border state. Democrats saying that, they're afraid about what this might do to their communities. They're afraid of the specter of SB 1070, and they point to the potential for racial profiling in HCR 2060. Now, the conventional wisdom might be that this ballot initiative would help Republicans, given how Republicans have been polling on the topic of immigration, particularly this cycle. But I did talk to one GOP strategist who told me that this could potentially backfire on Republicans. He said, Republicans who are voting on immigration are showing up to the polls anyway. But what this might do is galvanize young Latino voters who maybe weren't necessarily feeling President Biden, weren't necessarily feeling former President Donald Trump, but all of a sudden they have a reason to go out and vote against HCR 2060 in fear that somebody who's undocumented in their lives could be affected. So that is the way that it could shake out, at least potentially, come November, should this make it on the ballot. Yamiche?
Well, I also want to ask you, I mean, there are opponents of this. I wonder, do they have any avenues to keep this off the ballot at this point?
Well, Yamiche, there is technically a 10-day period after this passes through the state legislature for it to be challenged. But I've talked to Democrats in both chambers of the state legislature who've admitted that it's very, very unlikely they'll be able to successfully challenge HCR 2060. So if it passes the State House today, it is for all intents and purposes going to be on the ballot in November. Yamiche?
Yeah, well, great reporting from Arizona as always. Thanks so much, Alex. And join me now is the mayor of Yuma, Arizona, Doug Nicholls. He's a Republican. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Now, I'd like to start with your reaction to today's executive order by President Biden. Do you think this goes far enough to address the high level of border crossings we've seen over the past few years?
No, I don't think it goes far enough. It's one of those things that it'll be a good tool in the toolbox, but in and of itself is not going to change the whole flow of what's happening along the border for over the last 3 years.
And as you say, it's sort of just a tool. What do you think it'll mean for your city, Yuma, specifically?
Well, for us right now, our numbers are down, and I think it has a lot to do with the way the federal attorneys that are over this Yuma sector have been pursuing prosecutions. And so people have been returned to their home countries through that process, which has discouraged others to come through the Yuma area. That's really what we need all along the border, is that kind of process. And so with this executive order going in place, it's going to be, just because of the nature of the process, going to be applied differently in different sectors. So we're kind of have to wait and see how effective it's going to be in those sectors that are really busy, and if there's any backlash in the sectors that are not as busy.
Yeah. And we know that there, of course, was at the White House today a ceremony, an event where the president signed this or talked about signing this. You were invited to that. You were unable to attend. Would you be open to a future White House visit?
I actually go to the White House all the time to have these discussions. I definitely would be open to a visit to discuss issues. Photo op, not so much, but looking at, as I discussed earlier this year with the White House staff, Tom Perez, what the issues are for our community and some suggestions that we put out there for further discussion. So I definitely want to be at the table. I want to be help and influence policy, but it's been 3.5 years. I've made this offer every time I've spoken. It's one of those things. It's pretty late in the game. It does say that what all the border mayors and myself have said is that the president can do things without Congress to have a positive impact along the border. He's waited this long to make that happen. And that's the frustrating part.
You just mentioned that you wouldn't want to go to the White House for a photo op. Do you think that today was a photo op?
Well, at this point, the executive order was cast. There was no discussion to sit down with the president or his staff to say, if we modify this, or if we look at adding this provision, that would be a stronger bill or a stronger executive order. Those conversations didn't happen in the creation of this.
I've come here today.
So that's why I think we could have a better sit down and have more of a working meeting than it is just
4 months ago,
a photo op, so to speak.
Yeah, I understand. I want to also ask you, there's some concern with this executive order that it could overwhelm the resources of Customs and Border Protection. The Biden administration has argued Congress needs to act to provide more money for those kinds of resources. Would you like to see more focus on that issue from Capitol Hill?
Definitely. I think funding is one of those things that gets caught up in a lot of other ancillary issues. Funding for our men and women in Border Patrol, adding more agents, Customs. ERO in particularly needs, in ICE, needs a lot more funding. Those things are trapped in Congress right now. We need to have that move through. But then we also need the president being willing to work with Congress to get those things enacted and the funding levels where they really need to be.
Yeah. I also want to ask you about Congress. Of course, there was that bipartisan bill. You called it a good start. What's your message to lawmakers, especially lawmakers in your party, Republicans, who rejected it?
Well, I think it's really about where we're going on a political scale. We need to ignore the partisan side of this discussion, which the timing of this executive order throws that right in the face of that, in that we're coming at the end of a term. And so that always becomes hyper-partisan. If we would have addressed this a year or two earlier, it would have been a lot easier to take the partisanship out of the discussion. At the end of the day, I know the whole delegation from Arizona, they work hard trying to get right answers for our state. There's always going to be different perspectives. And every sector within Arizona is going to have different needs and different priorities. So there's a lot going on in this arena, and one executive order is not going to solve everything.
And you just said that you want to take partisanship out of this, but is that actually possible, you think, especially, you think about that bipartisan bill, it was all blown up because former President Trump basically said he wanted it rejected.
Well, obviously, if it was as easy as just saying we're going to take partisanship out of it, somebody would have done that, but that's just not the case. And particularly when you're at the end of a cycle and so many electeds are coming up for election, they're going to look to report to their base. They're going to go back to those positions. So from a political standpoint, this was the wrong time to try to do something nonpartisan. It needed to be done 2 to 3 years ago.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Mayor Nicholls. I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you very much for having me on.
And coming up, Attorney General Merrick Garland goes toe-to-toe with House Republicans on contempt, conspiracy theories, and the former president's criminal conviction. We're live on Capitol Hill with the highlights from today's heated House hearing next. Plus, Hunter Biden on trial, the lurid details of the case, the opening statements, the new witness testimony, and the cross-examination. That's straight ahead. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Attorney General Merrick Garland was on Capitol Hill today testifying before the House Judiciary Committee. That comes amid the continued fallout from former President Donald Trump's New York hush money verdict, and as the current president's son is in court today facing federal criminal charges. Republicans on the committee accused the Attorney General of politicizing the Justice Department, saying the DOJ had been weaponized to go after President Biden's political rivals, including Donald Trump. Merrick Garland pushed back against those falsehoods and false accusations, while also noting the increased threats against career DOJ employees.
These repeated attacks on the Justice Department are unprecedented, and they are unfounded. These attacks have not, and they will not, influence our decision-making. I will not be intimidated, and the Justice Department will not be intimidated. We will continue to do our jobs free from political influence, and we will not back down from defending democracy.
Joining me now is NBC's Sahil Kapoor on Capitol Hill. So, Sahil, what else stood out from today's hearing?
Hey, Yamish. Well, a few things. First, AG Garland told the House committee he will not hand over the audio recordings of the president's interview with the special counsel. That's a major topic of angst among Republicans in the House. Garland said that would chill cooperation with the department in future investigations. He said it could influence witnesses' answers if they thought the audio of their law enforcement interviews could be broadcast to Congress. These are direct words from Garland. He also said he has not directly listened himself to the tapes and that it's not relevant to his determination here. Garland said he does not regret appointing Jack Smith as special counsel, and he said he has never spoken to Hunter Biden. Garland also said that the DOJ has no control over the prosecutions in Manhattan, that it's independent. Now, Republicans have no evidence that the DOJ meddled in New York, so they are looking for a connection. And that brings me to an exchange that Congressman Matt Gaetz had. He brought up a man named Matthew Colangelo, a former DOJ official who in December of 2022 jumped to the New York DA's office to be a senior counsel. The theory here, which is unsubstantiated, is that he was placed there by the DOJ so they could manipulate what's happening in New York. Let's play that exchange between Gaetz and Garland.
But you had no problem dispatching Matthew Colangelo. Who's Matthew Colangelo?
That is false. I did not dispatch Matthew Colangelo.
Matthew
That's
Colangelo,
false.
Colangelo makes this remarkable downstream career journey from the U.S. Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., and then pops up in Alvin Bragg's office to go get Trump. And you're saying that's just a career choice that was made that has nothing to do with the lawfare coordinated by the...
I'm saying it's false. I did not dispatch Mr. Colangelo anywhere.
And as part of the same context, Yamiche, that same Justice Department is prosecuting Hunter Biden, the president's only surviving son, as well as Congressman Henry Cuellar, a Democrat, as well as Senator Bob Menendez, a Democrat. It cuts against the argument that this is solely being politicized for political purposes.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to see Merrick Garland get so fiery. We normally see him as sort of calm and mild-mannered, so very interesting there. I also want to ask, this hearing comes after the Judiciary and Oversight Committee advanced contempt proceedings against the Attorney General. Is there any sign that that will get a floor vote anytime soon?
There is still no indication about that, Yamiche. House Republican leaders have not said if or when it's going to come to the floor. It did pass committee in a very contentious hearing on a party line vote, but it's notable that it has not been scheduled yet. It's not as if the House of Representatives has been too busy with important business to schedule this. One question that, that is invariably going to get asked here is, do Republicans have the votes, or maybe do some vulnerable GOP members in swing districts think maybe this is not a great idea to hold the Attorney General in contempt? Of course, there's a practical problem that if the House does hold him in contempt, you're essentially asking Merrick Garland's department to prosecute Merrick Garland. It's not a very promising proposition, Yamiche.
Yeah, definitely. When you put it like that, definitely not promising. So thank you so much, Shahid Kapoor, for, of course, covering what really is a feisty day on Capitol Hill.
Thank you.
And Attorney General Merrick Garland also testified today that he cannot comment on the ongoing trial of Hunter Biden. That trial entered its second day today in Wilmington, Delaware, with opening statements and testimony from the prosecution's first witness. And just this hour, Hunter Biden's lawyers began their cross-examination of that witness. The president's son is facing 3 felony charges of making false statements to buy a handgun in 2018. During opening statements, the prosecution previewed some of the most anticipated witness testimony, including Beau Biden's widow, Hallie Biden. She is set to speak about her own use of crack cocaine during her relationship with Hunter. Hunter's lawyer also outlined their strategy, saying the government needs to prove that Hunter knowingly violated the law, and the jury needs to consider Hunter's state of mind when he purchased that handgun. Joining me now from Wilmington, Delaware, it's NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delaney. So what more did we learn from Hunter's lawyers today, and what will be their defense, you think?
Hey, Yamiche. Well, look, this case is being argued on really narrow grounds because the facts really aren't in contention. Hunter Biden was using drugs during this period. There's ample evidence of that. He filled out a form saying he wasn't using drugs when he bought this Colt revolver that he owned for 11 days. And so the prosecution's argument was this is a fairly straightforward case, and they say that Hunter Biden lied about using drugs. Now, the defense's argument is more nuanced. They're not contesting, obviously, that he was using drugs. There's a lot of evidence of that. What they're saying is that his state of mind at the time he filled out this form and bought the gun was that he was not a drug user. He was trying to get clean at that moment. And we don't really know the full state of the evidence on that. We'll have to wait and see how that unfolds. They're also saying that the employees of the gun store really had control of the form, and they were sort of filling it out for him, and that it wasn't clear that he knew exactly what he was saying in that form. So they're trying to say he wasn't responsible for the lie. So a lot is going to come down to what they can prove or what the prosecution can prove about his state of mind, Yamiche.
Yeah, and of course, court just wrapped right now for the day. We've also heard, though, from the prosecution's first witness. What did we learn from her? Anything new in particular? She's an FBI agent that was laying out a lot.
Yeah, not really new for those of us who have followed the case, but so often the prosecution will bring the case agent, the investigative agent, on first to sort of set the stage for the jury, fulfill some context. And she did that. She introduced some, for example, ATM receipts showing where Hunter Biden was during this period around the time he was buying the gun. Then the prosecution, through her, introduced excerpts from Hunter Biden's memoir, which he actually narrated, the audiobook version, in his own voice. And so the jury heard his own voice talking about his pursuit of crack cocaine during this period in 2018 and how it consumed his life, and how one of his superpowers, as he put it, was to be able to go into any town and city in America and find crack, sometimes at great physical risk to him. And then after that, they introduced, through this FBI agent, the infamous Hunter Biden laptop. that he left at a repair shop in Delaware. Thousands and thousands of pages of evidence, text messages, photos, videos were taken by the FBI from that laptop. A summary of 75 pages is entered into evidence here, and a lot of that shows very heavy drug use by Hunter Biden during this period. So it's important evidence for the prosecution.
Yeah, well, definitely a trial that we'll keep watching. Thank you so much, Kendall Lane from Wilmington, Delaware. And up next, too little, too late. That's how Republicans are responding to President Biden's new crackdown at the border, with immigration set to be a key issue for voters heading into November. We'll dig into the politics of it all next. You're watching Meet the Press Now.
With an election just months away, the president hopes that issuing an executive order will demonstrate that he cares about this crisis and is trying to fix it. This is like turning a garden hose on a fire-alarm fire, and the American people are not fools.
Welcome back. That was Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell accusing President Biden of playing election year politics with today's border executive order. Though you may remember earlier this year, McConnell and Senate Republicans walked away from a bipartisan border deal. Joining me now on set is Molly Ball, senior political correspondent for the Wall Street Journal, Mo Alithi, Democratic strategist and executive director of Georgetown University's Institute of Politics and Public Service, of course, the best university in the world, and Pete Seat, Republican strategist and former White House spokesperson for President George W. Bush. Thank you all for being here. So, Molly, I want to start with you. What do you think about what Mitch McConnell is saying here? Do you think he's right to say that this is sort of him playing politics, the president playing politics? And what do you make of the fact that the president's leaning into what really is a political liability for him?
Yeah, look, I think it's clear that the White House has realized that, as you say, this is an enormous political liability for the president. Lots of polling has shown that for many voters, it's even immigration is more of an issue than even the economy, which we know is always a central issue for most voters. And we have found in our own Wall Street Journal polling that more voters blame the crisis at the border on President Biden's inaction and cancellation of Trump-era immigration policies than on the Republicans for refusing to go along with the bipartisan border deal that the White House was involved in negotiating. So I do think that, the president has an uphill battle to convince voters that he's sincere in this. Now, they will say, he was finally moved to act after Republicans refused to go along. But the fact is, it's been 3.5 years, and he's just now doing something about this. So I think it may be difficult for him to make that argument.
Well, do you think that there is wiggle room to try to change this, that there's a gain here for President Biden? Because so many times I talk to voters, and they feel like their opinions of this are sort of baked in.
Yeah, I think Democrats feel like late is better than never. They watched that special election in New York earlier this year where Tom Suozzi made a very strong case to voters that it was important that Democrats recognize this issue, meet voters where they are, say we're not ignoring this, we're not trying to pretend this isn't happening, because that's been a lot of what Republicans have been saying as well, is that, the White House and the president were claiming that there was no issue here. And so they're saying at least we recognize there's an issue, there's an issue, and we have something to point to say that we're doing something about it. So for a lot of Democrats, I think in swing districts or in sort of the middle, on the left, they're not happy about this at all. But I think for Democrats who are concerned about this mainly as a political issue, they are glad that they at least have something to point to now.
Yeah. Pete, I want to ask you, put your campaign strategist hat on here. You have President Biden leaning into an issue that Republicans want to be talking about. So I wonder, do you think Republicans are happy to see President Biden leaning in on this issue that is really playing on their turf in some ways?
Well, I don't think what he did today will move the needle in any way, either as a policy or as politics. I mean, let's roll back the clock, as Molly pointed out. 94 executive orders in the first 100 days signed by Joe Biden that led, you can draw a direct line, that led to 250,000, the highest number in a single month of migrant encounters this past December. That's why we're here. That's why polling is what it is. And that's why Donald Trump is leading on the issue of immigration. Joe Biden sees that. The campaign sees that. The White House sees that. So today is a nakedly political decision. And I don't think it's a calculated risk that they're taking either. I think it's a Hail Mary. It's a Hail Mary because they see this, the number 2 issue, typically immigration, is being lost right now. And so he needs to, you want to talk about turf, he needs to play on Donald Trump's turf on the immigration issue if they're going to have any chance of winning in those battleground states.
If you talk about political decisions here, though, there are Democrats who say, well, look at what former President Trump did. There was this bipartisan deal that Republicans and Democrats were on board with, but President Trump then said, I want that rejected. Do you think Republicans are going to pay a price for that at all?
No, I think a lot of people's memories are short and they won't recall that, but progressives in the Democratic Party are going to remember what happened today, and they're already upset. They're already coming out against the president's announcement, and, you know, they're upset about Gaza and student debt and a host of issues, and he just keeps giving them stiff arm.
Well, what Pete's talking about is true. There are a lot of progressives that are very mad today. I want to read for you California's Alex Padilla. I want to read to you what his statement says. President Biden has undermined American values and abandoned our nation's obligation to provide people fleeing persecution, violence, and authoritarianism with an opportunity to seek refuge in the U.S. I urge President Biden to live up to his pledge to restore our nation's moral standing in the world and our historic role as a haven for refugees and asylum seekers. What do you make of this calculation, given the anger that we're seeing on the left, and even the ACLU saying they're planning to sue?
Sure. No, there's going to be some on the left who are upset with this, but it is still I think what he did today is still in sync with a majority of Democratic voters. Now, he can't afford to lose a lot of progressives heading into this election. But I think even the president is out there saying, look, what I did today is not ideal. We have to stem the flood that we're seeing at the border, but there are other things we need to do that would protect children, that would protect and make the asylum process easier for folks. And congressional Republicans are the ones stopping that. Look, if I was still playing in politics, I would actually want to play on this turf right now. Because you're right, late is better than never. And never is worse than late. And so when the president puts something out there that am a Democrat who says he should have done a while ago, and Republicans attack it, he now actually has a case to make. As opposed to just being in a defensive crouch, he now actually has a case to make. Will he end up winning the immigration issue in the polls? I don't know. Can he neutralize it just a little bit? Maybe. And he's got to do that. He's got to do that. And it's a bad look for congressional Republicans to be attacking this after they are the ones who tanked a deal that they wrote in the first place.
Yeah. I want to ask you, though, progressives are already mad at President Biden over Gaza and what's going on in Israel. Is this just sort of a calculation we're just going to make people mad again?
Look, an election isn't... It's so funny. This is an election between two incumbent presidents. Usually an election where you have an incumbent is a referendum on that incumbent. This time, it actually is a choice. And he has to go out there and make the choice. He can't, if this is simply a conversation about what he has or hasn't done, he's going to maybe have some issues. But if he can make it an actual choice to progressives about what he wants to do versus what Donald Trump wants to do, then I think you see progressives
and Molly,
criticism muted.
I want to talk to you, of course, as we turn to the issue of Israel. President Biden sat down with Time magazine. He talked about Benjamin Netanyahu. He said in part, my major disagreement with Netanyahu is what happens after Gaza's over. What does it go back to? Do Israeli forces back in? There needs to be a two-state solution. I mean, he was in some ways very biting in his words about Benjamin Netanyahu. What do you make of that and sort of the relationship there?
I think a lot is going to depend on what happens with this peace plan that he's put forward and whether that gets any traction. And I don't know whether there's any chance that that succeeds. But obviously, if he can successfully broker some end to this conflict, that would go a long way with all factions of the electorate who are simply distressed that this bloody conflict has been raging for so many months. And a lot of the polling that we've seen on, voters, a large majority of voters disapprove of his handling of the conflict. And most of that is simply because they are distressed that it has gone on for so long, not that they believe he should be giving more to one side or the other. He's been all along trying to walk this tightrope of continuing to support Israel while also putting pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government and trying, according to some critics, to sort of micromanage the war effort. And so I think, again, if he can actually make some material real progress that will show that that was not all for naught, that would go a long way. But I think that's going to have a lot more to do with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Molly, Mo, Pete, thank you all for this robust conversation. I appreciate it. And after the break, we're spotlighting the high-stakes race for governor in battleground North Carolina, where Democrats are hoping the abortion issue could make a difference. My one-on-one interview with the state's Democratic candidate, Attorney General Josh Stein, is next. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Let's turn to North Carolina, where Democrats are hoping to not just hold on to the governor's mansion in November, but maybe flip the state blue in the race for the president as well. North Carolina Attorney General Josh Stein, the Democratic nominee for governor, is out with his first television ads of the cycle. One ad hits his Republican opponent, Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson, for past remarks on abortion. Take a listen.
For me, there is no compromise on abortion. It makes no difference to me why or how that child ended up in that womb.
Abortion in this country is not about protecting the lives of mothers. It's about killing a child because you aren't responsible enough to keep your skirt down.
This ad comes just days after our friends at the Cook Political Report moved North Carolina's governor's race from lean Democrat to a toss-up. A recent poll from them has the race between Stein and Robinson tied. Joining me now from North Carolina is North Carolina Attorney General Josh Stein. As we said, he is the Democratic nominee to be the next governor of North Carolina. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Yuma.
Now, this ad on abortion is one of the first your campaign released. You released two. Why is this issue of abortion the one that you wanted to start with? And do you really think it's one of the biggest issues that voters are thinking about in North Carolina as November comes around?
There are going to be a number of important issues that we discuss in the context of the campaign. Personal freedoms like women's reproductive freedoms, strong public schools, safe neighborhoods, a thriving economy that works for everyone. So this is just our first ad, but it's an important ad because the position that my opponent has is harsh. It is the most absolutist position a person can possibly have, and it would represent a dramatic step backwards for the women of North Carolina. Last summer, the Republican legislature overrode Governor Cooper's veto and instituted a 12-week ban, a severe restriction over where the law had been. But even with that, North Carolina is the southernmost state in which a woman can get an abortion after 6 weeks. If Mark Robinson is governor, that law will change and we will go down to 6 weeks or 0 weeks. He, in fact, said he wants to go to 6 weeks and then keep going down from there. So abortion truly is on the ballot this November in North Carolina.
And your ad, it spends, of course, a lot of time talking and sort of, I should say, showing what Mark Robinson has said in the past. I know you've been talking about what he's been saying, but there were millions of dollars also spent on ads bringing up those controversial statements from Robinson in the Republican primary. And he won that race and has essentially been tied with you in the polls since then. So does it look like voters really care about what he said in the past?
Well, there's a big difference between Republican primary voters, which represent just a sliver of the Republican Party, and general election voters, which include all Republicans, all Democrats, and all unaffiliated. And what's interesting about North Carolina, Yamish, is that the largest voter registration block in North Carolina are unaffiliated people, 38%, followed by Democrats, 32%, followed by Republicans at 30%. And so we want to educate all voters what's at stake. And I'm confident that those voters who are persuadable in the middle, and they're from all parties, are going to choose a forward-looking and inclusive vision for the state that's about growing the economy. It's not about dividing us. It's not about stripping reproductive rights from women.
And you talk about the general election, though we should note, of course, former President Donald Trump, he won North Carolina twice. So I want to ask you one more time, do you really think controversial statements are going to really turn voters off? Of course, as you just said, voters across the political spectrum here.
Yeah. Donald Trump won twice in 16 and 20, barely in 20, only by 1.3%. But I won in 16 and 20, and I'm the only Democratic Attorney General in the country to represent a state that President Trump won twice. It's hard, it's expensive, and if people out there want to support me at joshstein.org, they're most welcome. But I think that the job of governor is different than the job of president, and I'm applying for that job. And the voters have a choice between two people to hire, me and Mark Robinson. I have been fighting for people. This man just fights the job-killing culture wars. And I have confidence that if we do our jobs well, which is to properly introduce myself and him to the voters, that the voters will choose a more forward-looking and inclusive vision for our state.
And as you bring up introducing yourself to voters, you know, a poll out last week from the Click Political Report had you and Mark Robinson tied at 37% with 17% undecided. That's a lot of undecided voters for a race between two statewide officials. Both of you have statewide titles. How do you get voters who don't know you, don't know either of you really, to back you in particular?
Well, I was in Morehead City on the coast yesterday. I was in Concord outside of Charlotte today. I'm headed to Clay and Cherokee counties in the furthest point west tomorrow. So I'm all over this state. So it's getting in front of people, talking to people, listening to them, hearing what their issues and concerns are. But it's also paying for advertisements. That's why we went up on TV this week, was because we want to start the process of educating voters about what the choices are, what the stakes are, and what my vision is compared to my opponents.
And what's your pitch, particularly to Trump supporters who might be looking to back you?
It's all about which governor will give you and your family a better shot at a successful future. I am about safe neighborhoods. I've been Attorney General prosecuting violent crime, eliminating the largest backlog of untested rape kits in the entire country. We helped to lead the national bipartisan coalition of state AGs to hold the big drug companies accountable that created the opioid crisis. And now we're going after fentanyl traffickers and dealers. So I've got a story, a record of delivering for people. I have a plan to improve our public schools, which it's the path to success for all North Carolinians, to make our economy thrive and succeed for everyone. And then again, like I said, protect people's personal freedoms.
And I want to ask you really quickly, do you also want to see President Biden come and campaign alongside you in North Carolina?
Yeah, I've already campaigned with the president, and we want him to fight and win in North Carolina.
Well, thank you so much, Attorney General Stein. I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate being able to break that story about your ad. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Yuma.
And up next, we're live in India, where Prime Minister Modi is declaring victory in the world's largest democratic elections. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. After a long 6-week election process and more than 640 million votes cast, today India's Prime Minister declared victory. It appears voters have delivered a surprising setback, though, for Prime Minister Modi. Results show Modi's Hindu nationalist BJP party failed to secure a majority on its own, falling short of a landslide win predicted by the exit polls and losing dozens of seats in parliament. Joining me now from the ground in Delhi, India, is NBC News international correspondent Janice Mackey-Frayer. So, Janice, official results for India's election commission are coming in. What do we know so far?
We know that Prime Minister Narendra Modi has claimed a third term in power. The surprising part here is the strong showing by the opposition party, leaving Modi in a position where he didn't get the landslide victory that his BJP party was hoping for, didn't even get a majority, and now he's going to have to rely on the goodwill of coalition parties in order to form a majority government. This is not the outcome that the BJP and Modi were looking for. The early exit polls had suggested that they might be in a position to get a supermajority, and it's certainly a far cry from that.
And what concessions do you think Modi's BJP party need to make in order to form a coalition government? And what's the possibility that the opposition could partner with BJP's allies to form a coalition?
Well, what we're going to see is something that Modi has not been accustomed to for his 10 years in power, in that he's going to have to make concessions to his coalition partners in order to firm up his government. There will be a lot of political horse trading and partners looking for influence within his government. There are some huge challenges facing Modi in his third term. Youth unemployment is a major issue here with voters, rights for farmers, also growing the country's economy. And so he's going to need to have a solid government behind him in order to address some of these issues. It's why the Congress Party, which is leading the opposition coalition, says that it was a moral and political loss for Modi and a victory for the voices of the opposition, which have accused Modi of using arrests and other tools of the state to suppress dissent and suppress opposition in his time in power. These are allegations that the government has denied, but they are seeing a reason to rejoice with what is a sobering outcome for Modi.
Certainly an interesting election and a large election. Janice Mackey-Frayer, thank you so much for your reporting live from India. And we're back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. The news continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.